Hey everybody, Rex Bear, Leak Project. How the heck are you? Fantastic day today. I hope your day is going well as well. We have John Fraser with us, one big box of paranormal tricks. We're going to talk about it from ghosts to poltergeists to the theory of just one paranormal power. It's great to see you, John. How you been? It's like 5 years.
Oh,
Has
it's
it already?
about 5 years. I think we last spoke. I think we probably had a lockdown in between times, but other than that, I'm keeping absolutely fine. It's a pleasure to be back.
Great to have you back. And time is cruising. Wow. Doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it's amazing how quick 5 years goes by now. CERN, probably not, but when you get older, you can just blame it on things that probably don't have. Anyway, so that's a whole other podcast. But I want to talk about so why did you decide to write one big box of paranormal tricks?
Well, I had just written a book about poltergeists, in which I had found a connection between normal ghosts and poltergeists, a huge overlap, and had probably come to the conclusion they were one and the same thing. And then, as I say, lockdown came and I had lots of time to think and read and finally to do a bit of outside research as well. And it started to occur to me that we have so many different paranormals, be black magic, white magic, witchcraft, shamanism, demonism, even. Belief in vampires in Eastern Europe, to the more conventional ones, spiritualism, parapsychology, and ghosts and poltergeists. And I started to investigate the ones that had up until then been a little bit outside my comfort zone. And to be honest, um, it started to occur to me that most of the actual phenomena were appear to be very similar. And perhaps we're kind of compartmentalizing ourselves when we put ourselves into our own little boxes. Perhaps, at least for most types of paranormal, we should be looking for one phenomena.
Real quick, wanted to take a moment and let you know about this awesome new program that I got involved with. It's called Legal Shield, and it's really cool because not only does it protect my identity from identity theft, and I don't know if you just saw recently where there were billions of personal records that were not only stolen but then uploaded into the dark web. And you've probably gotten a notification recently that your social security number was found on the dark web. Well, that's because of this, like the biggest hack in history for personal data and records. Well, that's not the only one. So there have been a multitude of hacks into people's personal information, from medical information to personal information, where you live, what your phone number is, your social security number, a lot of personal identifiable information. And so, anyway, this thing called Legal Shield is so cool because not only does it protect me personally from identity theft, and it will you too. It's a very cheap membership if you look at what it gets, but you also get really cool access to lawyers. So all you do is you click on the app if you need estate planning, like a will or a trust, legal advice. Maybe you have tenants that you can't get rid of that have been not paying their rent, or you want to get into some personal property. There's just so many different things you can use a lawyer for. I think they should call it pocket lawyer personally, but definitely check it out. Click the link specific and send me a text. You'll probably have some questions, but I've helped several people already and they love this thing. I actually interviewed somebody a while back that lives out in California, and he said he's had this. His name's Robert. He's a friend of mine. He's had this for like 20 something years. So the company's been in business for, I think, 50 years. But send me a text 970-616-5677. You can also send me an email, leakproject@gmail.com. Click the link to sign up if you just want to sign up online and start using it right away. Like you can that sounds like what I heard a previous researcher talk about, how he's kind of on the theory right now of everything is like one entity. And
Hmm.
I find that as far as this paranormal stuff, like demonology associated with like seances and such, But so let's get into this. Like, what? Tell us more about your research and how that's happened. And as far as the poltergeist phenomena, correct me if I'm wrong here, but did you describe last time we talked that it is oftentimes associated? It could be a person that's oftentimes going, or even a kid that's going through puberty or something, and that's causing the poltergeist activity, and they don't even realize it.
I think there's a definite good chance of that. I mean, it's not so much a kid of puberty. It's more a case of uh, poltergeists always seem to be in position happening when somebody in a household is under stress. And no, don't know how. No, you have to go back a few years, but I think we can all remember that puberty and adolescence was one of the most stressful periods in most of our lives. So that can be one significant cause. Where it gets more interesting, though, is, of course, other significant causes of stress are a house move, and then suddenly you find yourself in a haunted house when possibly, in effect, you could be haunting the house due to all the psychic energy, in effect, that you're creating. And the other one, which is even more subtle in some ways, is a bereavement. Now, obviously, that's one of the most stressful things that can possibly happen to anybody. And if that gets related to strange movements of objects or what have you, your immediate assumption is it's great uncle, whoever, or great auntie, whoever, trying to communicate with you. But it's equally possible, I'm not discarding the first reason by any means, but it's equally possible that it could actually be the way stress affects your mind and possibly changes your consciousness and possibly gives you, in effect, special or paranormal powers to actually do some very strange things.
So tell us about that. Where is the data that suggests that?
Just about, if you're talking, just about every poltergeist case that, well, anybody investigates. I don't think it's ever been compiled into data because every paranormal researcher has his own ways of compiling data, and some ask the stress question, others don't. But let's take a few well-known cases. For example, the Amityville horror. Now, whether or not you think some of that was fake, there is a case for it not being. Let's assume it wasn't for a second. You've got a scenario where a family moved into a house where they had totally overextended themselves on their mortgage. That's a definite fact. They moved into the house where there had previously been a serial killer. And you've got all the symptoms there for people wreaking themselves out and possibly going into a different state of mind where they might have caused some of the phenomena themselves. The Enfield case in England, there were 3 children, one of whom wasn't keeping terribly well. Are you aware of Enfield? It's kind of become world famous. It was covered in The Conjuring 2, but only very roughly based on the facts.
I'm not familiar.
No, but some of your listeners were. I mean, that had a large stress factor involved. I mean, I'm currently investigating a confidential case, but it involves a family of 5 in a rather overcrowded house again with some health issues. And just about every single case of poltergeists, there'll be an underlying stress factor. No, somebody should spend forever going through all the archives of all the researchers and actually categorize it statistically. But as we all have our own styles of doing things, and there isn't a particular standard, it would be quite difficult. So I can only speak anecdotally, and I would basically ask your listeners if they know of any poltergeist cases, whether or not that would fit the bill. But certainly, in any I've experienced, it certainly has.
So wasn't there or isn't there a native burial ground below the that location, Amityville Horror House out there?
I think that is still in the category of hearsay. I mean, the problem with Amityville is somebody thought they'd totally falsified it. I would tend to say there's a take away all the drama, the trauma in Amityville 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And there is the basics of a case there. I'm not 100% convinced whether or not there was a burial ground. I haven't seen the full research for that, but there's certainly, even without a burial ground, there was enough trigger factors to have a genuine case. I mean, I think Amityville basically revolves around whether or not they have sufficient outside witnesses, and their main outside witness is the priest. And the priest has been kind of gone on record both ways as saying it was totally exaggerated, and then saying before his death on TV, I think mid-1990s, that most of it was actually true. So it's, I mean, it's not the best poltergeist case in the world, because even if it was, most of the witnesses were just the family. And when you're trying to prove anything to the outside world, what you don't want is just a select few witnesses. You want a case such as Enfield, which I think by the end of it had 36 witnesses, including newspaper reporters and policemen. So I mean, there's two things. First of all, having a good poltergeist case, and then there's showing to the world it is a good poltergeist case. Amityville will never hit the second. It'll always be disputed. But I personally think there's just enough there to take it a bit seriously, at least.
Now, with that in mind, though, let's take it serious. Let's say that stuff happened. How can we for sure know that it was caused by the people that were dealing with stress?
We can't for sure know, and certainly my One Big Box book doesn't try to impose a definite answer. It takes somebody through my investigative and very occasional paranormal experience and basically lets somebody decide. But what one can be far more critical of is somebody that comes into a place like Amityville and immediately talks about demons, or goes to a haunted site and talks about a portal to hell in somebody's kitchen. I mean, that's totally belief-led, and somebody else's demon is somebody else's shaman, or I mean, every culture has a word for unknown powers, but to suddenly call something demonic, especially when it hasn't really done any major harm, is A, totally belief-led, and B, going to scare the heck out of anybody that's already living in the house. And if I am right, will probably increase the phenomena, which probably isn't what the people wanted in the first place.
Okay, so we don't really know for sure, like, that it's one person in particular or a multitude of people that's causing it in that circumstance. but you said there's other things that we can look at. Or other cases and such. So let's talk about some of those because I'm really interested to hear the connection. And I think I brought this up last time. I don't remember if I did or not. But if this research is correct and many of the poltergeist experiences and books flying off of shelves, encounters that you would think a ghost was causing, these movements or some type of spirit. Well, if it is caused by the people during stress, it makes me think of MK Ultra stuff and the experiments that were done and that are talked about in the 70s where they would cause extreme stress and there's under their subjects to see like not only to compartmentalize them and to get them to switch personalities and to basically create new personalities, but also what we might look at as paranormal kind of stuff. But it's just maybe they're looking for that key ingredient to cause books to move or something to move without physically touching it, as an example. Like think of how that could be used and refined, and especially in clandestine operations and such. And wow.
Oh, absolutely. And probably the best example of somebody that started off with random phenomena and refined it is a gentleman in England called Matthew Manning. Now, he started off in the 1970s as living in an old house with his family, strange poltergeist incidents, things falling off the shelf. He then went to a boarding school and things continued to happen. In fact, he was nearly expelled, desks falling over and so on. So he was undoubtedly probably the catalyst for, the strange events. Then when he grew up a little older, he started communicating. He believed he was communicating with spirits. And he went through phases of being able to automatically write in Latin and Greek, which neither he knew nor the 17th century lady spirit he was in communication with was likely to know either. I mean, in those days, a lady's education, unfortunately, was just a preparation for marriage and was probably more needlework and so on. So he's focusing on an entity that he believes in, but is probably getting gifts that he couldn't possibly get from that entity. Then he finally grows up and becomes an internationally acclaimed healer who has had a bestseller called The Link along the way. So, I mean, like Manning kind of went from poltergeist boy to going through the whole realms of spiritualist type phenomena. And was he just lucky or unlucky? And suddenly had one type of phenomena and then got contacted by the spirits? Or possibly was it just that he learned how to gradually control the special powers he had?
I don't know. It's
no, but I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you can take it a stage further as well. I mean, Aleister Crowley, a occultist, demonologist. He had very similar phenomena to Matthew Manning, where he called on his guardian angel called Eos, and wrote the Book of the Law through automatic writing in 2 hours. Now we've got one guy going for a slightly demonic guardian angel, I assume, if it's Crowley, and we've got another guy going through what he would have termed a spiritualist experience, but they're both coming out with exactly the same type of phenomena. I mean, if we're trying to be at all scientific, I mean, most big breakthroughs are usually on one scientific theory. I mean, Einstein didn't come up with, different versions of gravity for an apple or a banana or a pear or what have you. So if we're trying to make sense of the paranormal, I'd say at the very least, we should consider and we should start with trying to explain very similar phenomena under one possible theory. Even if you don't agree it's entirely internal, you shouldn't be discarding phenomena occultists come out with, or just because you're not of that persuasion, or phenomena spiritualists come out with because you don't believe in some strange way it's scientific, or phenomena in Eastern Europe where a lot of poltergeist cases are described as vampire cases, same phenomena, different name. Or if you go to Latin America, a lot of poltergeist and some UFO cases are blamed on the duende, which roughly translated means in Colombian means goblins. And of course, we don't take it seriously because we don't believe in goblins. But it's just their way of expressing what is probably the same paranormal box of tricks. You can see where I got the title from now.
I do. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So we've got vampires, goblins, and poltergeist activity that are now being linked together, it appears.
Yeah, no, I mean, we don't, let's, to, not to be unfair to people abroad, I mean, most of our poltergeist cases get blamed in England and probably America as well, get blamed on grey ladies or black monks. I mean, it seems that if you were ever a black monk, you were guaranteed to haunt places in perpetuity. It's nearly like we find there's a particular famous case that's probably one of the most famous cases in England at the moment, called the Black Monk of Pontefract. Now, Pontefract does have a couple of monasteries, but nowhere near this council house where all the phenomena supposedly taken place. The only reason it was called a Black Monk is because somebody at one point, thought they saw a dark, shadowy figure, so they immediately started to call it a monk. And there's been all kind of folklore based around it, how he was hung nearby for killing a child, and the gallows are nowhere nearby, and all that is total mythology. But there is a poltergeist case underneath. So we express these things based on what's familiar to us and what we believe in. We are no different to Colombia or Romania. It's just we tend to think of black monks and grey ladies as being a bit more sensible than goblins and vampires. I can't think why. Quite like vampires myself.
I mean, yeah, it's vampires. They usually have all the money, they're out on
Yeah.
fun, they got superpowers, but I mean, they got to drink blood. So I don't know, man. It's like, yeah, but that's a whole other podcast. Not judging, but Blade. That's wow, what a trip. All right, so but if we can, I want to hear more data about this theory of all being one energy. Now, you could say everything's consciousness. So we're just perceiving consciousness based upon our tools that we have and our experiences and beliefs. So is it like that, or is it different? Like, are you now saying that all of it Crowley didn't channel these deities, people that receive these downloads, none of them are contacting any other energies. It's all just themselves, or it's all just this universal energy?
Well, it would either have to be themselves, or it could be people are acting as catalysts for an outside energy. That's certainly not impossible. The only reason I tend to go for something within us is because most of these entities don't talk a lot of sense. And if I was a past life or a black monk or a vampire or anything, you would probably try to communicate in a much more forthcoming way. A couple of quick examples. Colleague of mine in the Society for Psychical Research, Barry Colvin, investigated a case. I don't think it's too well known your side of the Atlantic, but it was well investigated. It's known as the Andover case, where a couple of children were creating poltergeist wrappings, and the wrapping was, you were able to communicate with the wrapping through going through the alphabet. It was quite laborious, but there was certainly something happening. But when questioned, this entity, although I think he claimed to be a gentleman, just kept coming out with predicting next week's soccer results. Now, the kids were very into soccer. They don't know about the possible existent or non-existent entity, but that was the limit of the entity's conversation. Not only that they managed to get most of the soccer results wrong. Just going back to Enfield for a second, because it's such a good example. One of the children was, in inverted commas, possessed by one of the previous owners of the place, an elderly man who had in fact died there. But when she was possessed and speaking in this deep, gruff voice, the sort of questions the gentleman wanted to ask was about menstruation and periods. So if this gentleman existed, he certainly had a strange type of conversation. Perfect conversation for a 13-year-old child who's probably too shy by herself to bring it up. But, the communicative skills of most entities are like totally random and basic. That's why I tend to at least slightly favour a power within us. But there's a whole level we haven't looked at that I should talk about briefly. Now, obviously, we all agree we can change our consciousness. We can do that through self-hypnotism. We can do that through stress. We can do that through various kinds of ways, either voluntary or involuntary. But over and above that, there just seem to be some places where either the geology or the electromagnetism seems to add to the catalyst, if you like. Now, most of your viewers will have heard about Rendlesham Forest and the famous UFO incident in the late 1980s. Now, Rendlesham has also had a lot of poltergeist phenomena, people walking through the woods and being hit by objects. It's also the home of the legendary Shug monkey, which is probably as close as we'll ever get to your Bigfoot. He's apparently supposed to be 8 foot tall and with the face a bit like a baboon. There's been sightings of him up till about 10 or 15 years ago. I say him, it could be a her, of course. I highly suspect a forest the size of Rendlesham actually has a physical Bigfoot animal. So in effect, you have phenomena being being shown by a shadowy monkey type figure. Rendlesham's also right next to the famous Sutton Hoo burial chambers, which were found just before the Second World War, which makes me think that the Saxons might have thought the place to be quite special as well. Rendlesham, at least in the 80s, it's been shown, did have a high level of electromagnetism. I mean, who wouldn't with all the air bases around there? So you add all them together, you've actually got possible environmental factors that you could possibly add to your mental factors that seem quite often to go with paranormal cases. I'll give another quick example. A confidential poltergeist investigation by the SPR, by two of my colleagues in the SPR, at a Welsh farmhouse. They found that the room where all the objects were flying around had basically dangerous electrics, EMF readings going off the off the cycle, and the two people involved.
Real quick, the EMFs were going
well off the scale. Basically, you had dangerous
themselves or by the object.
No, by the wiring in the house
when this poltergeist activity was going on.
Yeah, I mean it was a pretty permanent fault, but yes, it in the room where the poltergeist activity was going on, there was EMF off the scale.
Did they tell you what kind of equipment or what kind of frequencies?
Yes, but I can't remember. I haven't got the same expertise as my colleague Steve Parsons in EMF. But this
is fascinating, by the way.
Okay. Let's think. He probably carries around Steve Parsons and Winsper probably carry around them a specialist EMF equipment around. I haven't got the frequencies.
That's okay. That's okay.
But it went off their scale, which is entirely different.
Okay.
To going off the scale of somebody that's got one of these little pocket ones that you can get from Ghostbusters Incorporated.
Those are the best.
They're fun. I used to love the thermometer. I used to love the thermometers with the little prods, and because I mean. You weren't actually, I mean, I think they were actually made for testing out the temperature in the middle of a turkey. So you were actually pointing it at a wall rather than pointing it at a ghost. And I mean, we all went through those phases in the early 2000s and they were good fun, but no, there's probably better gadgets than that. And the EMF ones are good fun for checking out there isn't. I mean, I'm sure they would have went off the scale as well when you've got something as profound as that. Yeah. But they also managed to discover there was a geological fault directly under the house. So if geology and electromagnetism is a catalyst for poltergeist, they found the perfect haunted house. No, I'm not saying anyone could walk in, but somebody of a particular disposition. And I mean, I've spoken to quite a few people who have had poltergeist incidents who actually say they won't carry a mobile phone for any length of time. So they might be sensitive to such things. And it's perfectly credible, I won't say proved beyond all reasonable doubt, that if you get a catalyst of people and a catalyst of places together, then something rather amazing starts to happen.
So basically, if you get the formula right, the background, the environment, and
the people.
Yeah. That's so then the question is it just because that's what happens when you mix them all up, or is it like is there a missing link that allows certain energies to connect and manipulate? I would think like when the one you were describing, some of the ones before, it was just the people, but there's so many cases and experiences that are there times that entities do latch on to people? I think so, but I definitely think that a lot of times you say like there's this internal energy source. So I want to hear more about that. Like, what is this? You say it's internal. Is it a part of our spirit, or is it a part of our like physical makeup and the DNA for some type of survival mechanism? I mean, I don't know. What is your research showing?
Um, uh, you're going to hate me for this. I'd be silly to say anything other than I don't know. Um, I
No,
mean,
thanks for the honesty. I appreciate it.
people come on shows and say they know what the paranormal is. They might be right, they might be wrong, but as to quantifying any external or internal energy, we're way before that yet. We then go into our little systems of belief and call them angels, spirits, demons, um, psychic energy. We can call it psychic energy, but we don't know what that is, so it doesn't really help at all. Uh, so so no, I mean it's I'm not trying to flip people's beliefs in somersaults. What my book is trying, One Big Box of Paranormal Tricks, is trying to do is to get people to think and maybe think outside their own paranormal box and look for connections. Give you one more interesting connection. Hypnotism. Now, obviously, most of this is about altered states of consciousness. I mean, shaman goes into some kind of altered state of consciousness before he does whatever he does. May or may not be on mescaline, but may or may not be a help. But hypnotism is an obvious altered state of consciousness. Hypnotism is something that has been used for both UFO, to retrace UFO encounters and also to retrace past lives. I can't say too much about the UFO encounters, but for quite an extended period in the past, I was part of a hypnotic regression group. Started off as a subject, turned out to be one of the worst subjects going. Probably about 5% of people can be deeply hypnotized. Probably about 5% of people are psychic as well. I don't know if there's a correlation or not. But anyway, I am under close supervision. I actually got trained to hypnotize people, and it was kind of clear there was an undoubted desire to please me, if you like, to please whoever was hypnotizing them and to come up with something not deliberate, but in a trance state. But there was also much better subjects than me. There was one in particular that got taken into about 5 or 6 different past lives. There was 2 that was particularly interesting. He got taken into a past life where he was a student at Cardiff University and subsequently died in the First World War. Now, he named all his officers, he gave himself a name, and we checked out they were all... So again, it was more likely to be ESP. Now, where it got really interesting, though, is he then started to automatically draw. Like, this guy is about artistic as I am, which is pretty limited, but he could do high-speed artistic artwork of the battle scenes, even of his death, which had to be obviously treated very carefully. and suddenly you found inner skills which aren't necessarily paranormal, but are they not the same type of skills that we were talking about earlier with Aleister Crowley writing the Book of the Law in 2 hours, and and um, and and the poltergeist boy whose name I've conveniently forgotten because obviously I'm not in a trance-like state. Obviously did the same. You've also got a lady called Rosemary Brown who was a spiritualist in her beliefs, who basically ended up composing concertos by Brahms and Liszt and so on, which are probably been analysed as good copies of existing works. So it seems that when you get yourself into a trance-like state, be it through the spiritualist process, the mediumistic process, the shamanistic process, strange things seem to happen. Some of the things are just about acceptable within science, such as automatic drawing, but some of them are possibly beyond our current science. Now, if we're going to try and convince our current science, I think it's going to be far easier if we try to at least rationalize ourselves into not treating the same powers as something different depending on who they come from.
All right. All right. Well, cool, man. I'm super looking forward to reading. I want to show off, actually. Let me go to your Amazon page here. So great reviews, and this is one big box. I like the name, man. So one big box of paranormal tricks, from ghost to poltergeist to the theory of just one paranormal power.
Yeah, I apologize for the long title. Let's just call it One Big Box of Paranormal Tricks. Yeah. I kind of wanted to add the ghosts and poltergeists because it kind of came from my book on poltergeists. It's kind of an extension, but it is a bit of a mouthful, I must admit. All I would say about the book is it's not a scientific book. It has theory in the title, but I would call it more a meditation. It brings my experiences and my research and lets people decide. It even pokes a little bit of fun at myself occasionally, because anyone that's been investigating the paranormals has had some weird moments. It's not meant to indoctrinate. I'm not an anti-demonologist or an anti-spiritualist or anti-anything. I just want people to reflect and hopefully come out of their boxes a little bit, and they might find it very rewarding, might find there's a greater understanding to be had there. There's also the possibility I'm totally wrong, and I wouldn't be the first paranormal researcher to be so.
I love your honesty. I definitely love the attitude. And there's, just so people know, if this is the first time you've heard John, we did an interview, like I said, about 5 years ago, and it was on poltergeist activity. And I remember at the time it was just a completely new perspective for me, and it's really resonated with me since then when you talked about that. And the book is available also. Poltergeist, a new investigation into destructive haunting, including The Cage, Witches Prison, Saint Oisith.
A witched prison always sells a few books.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, for sure, man. For sure. So I appreciate you, John. I hope you have a fantastic evening, morning. What time is it over there?
Oh, it's Friday evening over here. So yeah, I'll enjoy the rest of the evening. Might have left it just too late to go down to the bar, but
well,
I'll just chill for the rest of the evening.
All right, I saved you a hangover, man.
Absolutely, yes. I will. I will be in. I will be in a better state of consciousness tomorrow morning, and who knows, interesting things might happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, keep being the change the world needs to see, John. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure as always.